Get this going, and as soon as it starts, good. Okay, so let me show you what the debate questions are going to be, and these are things I want you to be thinking about as we're going through the notes, too. So first of all, some questions to ask as we're looking at new imperialism. Last week when we were doing our discussions, we were looking at the differences between old imperialism, leading us into what's new by the late 19th and early 20th century. So, some questions to ask yourself. First of all, why by this time in history were European nations able to assert their dominance across the globe? Any ideas as to why I put dominance in quotations? Huh? Is this a highly contestable idea that Western Europeans are just better and brighter and more apt to do things than the rest of the world?
Yeah.
Yes, definitely. Okay, so, or no, too. There are many authors that say, no, Europe is just better, and it's proven through their historical circumstances. Whereas others say, no, other cultures are better in other ways, but, you know, you got to look at those. So, that's a debatable idea. That's something that you're going to debate. What makes them dominant? Okay, next one. What factors contributed to the rise of new imperialism, and how did nations benefit, if at all? All right, next one. How did contemporaries justify new imperialism? You'll get that not only through your reading of the secondary source material, but there's also some primary stuff quoted and emphasized in that packet I gave you. And then how many of you read Rudyard Kipling? Ah, good for you guys. Okay, so that is also some good stuff that gives you ideas of how to justify imperialism. Next, what was new imperialism and its subsequent exploitation of the world the result of capitalism? In other words, can we be like Marx and blame capitalism for the bourgeoisie spreading across the globe, trying to assert their dominance in a quest for greater resources and exploitation of new markets? That's certainly something that socialist thinkers thought, other than just Marx. Like Vladimir Lenin said the same thing, and so that would be something that's definitely debatable. And then finally, what problems did new imperialism create for both the conquered peoples and the European nations? All right? So it's not just the conquered peoples that could suffer as the result of new imperialism. It's going to bring about a lot of conflict, too, as we'll see as we go through these things. So, I'm assuming you've all caught up in the reading, and so we're going to start by looking at a number of different areas of imperialism at this time. And you guys are going to be put on the stage here a little bit to tell me what happened and what you would do if you were in that circumstance, okay? So first, we're going to take a look at Britain. What was the crown jewel of the British Empire?
India.
India. All right, how did the mission in India, or how did the colony in India start for the Brits? Was it immediately this quest for them to exert their dominance over India politically, socially, and economically? Did they immediately set out to colonize India with their government? No, it was a slow process. What brought about this process of exerting their full dominance in India? Anyone? All right, so it's more than just the resources, but initially it was about resources and civilizing, right? It was a civilizing mission. All right, so some of the things happening in India. First of all, you've got that British East India Company. They're looking for resources. So the resources that they found in India allowed them to start to move in, infiltrate India economically. However, they were not yet exerting political dominance. It was basically just a bunch of traders from the East India Company moving in and starting to, set up shop. And so when things were working out, when there was a good relationship between the Indians and the Brits, things worked out, right? They were able to get, things out of this that benefited them. But then when things started to break down in that social relationship, when the Indians started to feel exploited, either politically, socially, or economically, what do? They're revolted! All right, very good. So that's going to be in response to some of the things they saw happening with the Civilizing Mission that the Brits were sending over to India. So Brits were starting to come into India. Once they came in economically, they started to send over a bunch of missionaries. Why would that? Well, first of all, why would the missionaries feel justified in going over to India to talk to them about civilized culture? They're all a bunch of heathens, and what? What were you going to say? That's their job. What is a missionary going to do in England, right? It's like, okay, well, everybody's already Christian here. I guess I can't really do much except help feed the poor. I'll go to India! That sounds exciting. Let's go to India and try some stuff and, trying to get rid of some of the superstitions that they had. So, we had this idea called the sati. You guys heard of the sati before in India? Okay, so there's this tradition in Indian culture where a woman's purpose was only to serve her husband, right? So after a woman became married, her only purpose in life was to serve her husband. Now what happens when that husband dies?
He has nothing to do.
this. And so often what they would, I mean, pretty much all the time, what they would do as a result of the sati principle would be to send a woman, sometimes on a raft, for instance, into a river to set herself on fire. And so, so this woman would be sent out in the midst of a river to set herself on fire and do some self-inflagration, because the only purpose she has in life is to serve her husband. And if that husband's gone, what's she got to do? Anything? No. So she kills herself. I mean, burns herself alive. All right, it doesn't sound very fun. And so a bunch of liberals and evangelicals were like, we can't let that happen. So they went to India and said, we got to get rid of this process. And, you know, it started to work. It was good. It was, you know, it was nice. But then after enough time, the Indians got sick of a bunch of Brits coming over and infiltrating their culture and their economy, feeling exploited, and so they quote-unquote mutinied. Why is that definitely a white term applied to this situation? A European term, mutiny, applying it to this situation.
That implies you already had a living relationship with the person.
Exactly. That it was not their land or their home to begin with. There was this willing subservience. That was never the case, and yet the British say, "Oh, they're mutinying against us because obviously they're supposed to love us as their civilizing influence, and they are our captors. And once they start to resist, it's a mutiny." All right. So at that point, the Brits got angry, and so Parliament debated about it, and Parliament said, "Well, hey, we're going to send in some representatives to establish direct rule, meaning our government coming over and owning this area, essentially." So they're going to set up a little thing called the bureaucracy of subordinates. Any idea what the bureaucracy of subordinates entails? Okay, you're going to take a bunch of British guys, send them over to India, set up a government, and you're going to, would it be favorable for your government to go in there, put a boot on their neck, crush their will to live, and then, not allow them to participate? Would that give them the feeling of being dominated and maybe want to revolt? Yes, okay, so what's the way for the Brits, anyway, to maybe allow a better relationship to develop without sacrificing too much power? In your bureaucracy in India...
Oh, you let them have, like, a council or whatever, but they don't really do anything.
Yes, there you go. So they are a part of the bureaucracy, and yet at the same time, they don't do that much, right? Because they will never fully be quote-unquote equal in the imperialist idea. And you can see that kind of here in this picture of these guys that are playing, what is that, croquet mallets? Yeah, there you go. So they're a bunch of, that's croquet. You can see the mallet at the bottom. Cricket's the wide bat, right? But they did play a lot of cricket with them, too. They had cricket teams, croquet teams. So you can see these two teams of gentlemen, and what do you notice about this picture? There's a mix. There's a mix of Indians, Hindus, and these British gentlemen. And so that's going to be the goal from that point forward is, hey, let's allow Hindu intermediaries to participate, but will they ever be fully equal? No, and that's where Gandhi comes in later in the early 1900s. He was a British educated lawyer, lived in, he's from India, went over to Britain to be educated, and despite that, he was still subjected to things like Jim Crow laws, so to speak, where he was not allowed on certain parts of trains in Britain. And so he thought, well, you know what, you're training us and you're essentially raising us to feel British, and yet, are we ever a part of this empire, truly? No. And so therefore, he wanted to inspire some nationalism and started to resist. And so we're not going to go into that right now, but that's essentially the response that we're going to see. And then you can see this one. This is a game that they played in the 19th century. In the Victorian era, kids would pull out this game. It's kind of like a Risk board, and that's why I love it. It's essentially a 19th century version of British Empire Risk, right? This is called Highways of Empire. But what do you notice about it? What's it telling you? Remember what the saying was in Great Britain before World War I? The sun never sets on the British Empire because they are everywhere, seeping in everywhere across the globe, as you can see. And so is that going to take a mountain of money in order to accomplish that? A mountain of resources to accomplish that? Absolutely. And for the Brits at this time, for many of them, it's worth it. Another example of that we can see through China. What was happening in China? What was Chinese society like before we had the dirty Brits coming in? Closed society entirely, because they refused to have anything to do with the outside world for a very long time, because they thought it would pervert their perfect culture, pervert their lands with this almost subhuman type of influence from outsiders. I gotta say, China, you're right, because as soon as the dirty Brits showed up, what were they trying to push down the throats or the lungs of the Chinese? All right, Opium, yes, because where are they growing opium legally? Huh? Britain. Where are they growing it? In India, right? They're growing it in India. And then in the I think it was the early 1800s or 1820s, the British government was trying to restrict that, saying, you know what, this is not a good thing for us to have in our culture. We're going to start to limit the amount of opium that we have in our culture. Eventually it'll be illegalized. And so what are we going to do with all this weed?
Give it to China.
Let's sell it to China, but they don't want it, right? So they say, oh, we really don't want your pot. And then what does the British say?
You're going to bring your pot.
They say, I'm sorry, China. You need to smoke my pot, China. They say, no, we really don't want to. Too bad, smoke pot. All right, so it's not going to go well because this brings about that whole Opium War experience where the Chinese tried to shut off things in the cities where the capitalists were bringing their influence. And so the capitalists, feeling a little dejected, went back to Parliament and said, hey, they're not letting us smoke, sell our pot over in China. And Parliament's like, well, okay, let's go to war over it. So they sent in a bunch of boats, including the HMS Nemesis. What a great name for a battleship for the Brits here, right? Because what's a nemesis? An enemy. So in comes the HMS Nemesis up against a bunch of Chinese junk ships, aptly named. Because as soon as they go up against the Nemesis, it just takes out the entire fleet with a bunch of cannon fire. So, result will be, what are we going to do in China?
China smokes pot.
Yeah, China smokes pot, and they love it! Yeah, okay, so we're getting highly addicted to it. The government's like, oh no, we want to legalize this, but no, sorry, because the British merchants are going to come into Canton and push their product like crazy. They're going to get the people addicted locally and then jack up the price and make sure that they're making lots of money from it. Then they'll do this in 4 other cities, because with the Treaty of Nanking, which will end the Opium War, this is going to open more cities to British influence, including the island of Hong Kong. So, unfortunately for the Chinese, not only did they have to open their cities to foreign influence now, and foreign trade, including illegal substances like opium, but now they also lose a very profitable island of Hong Kong. All right, so for the next 99 years, well, actually, I think they kept it all the way until, I think it was 150 years. I don't remember the Brits giving up until the 1990s. Might have been somewhere like around 1995 or something like that. But the Brits didn't give up the island. They just kept it to themselves and used it as their own little personal dominion, selling stuff like crazy. And so the Chinese, are they losing a lot of power and culture as a result of this?
Yeah.
Absolutely, absolutely. Okay, and then from that point, it's just going to be a matter of other countries coming in and doing the same thing. You had a question, Drew.
I was saying, like, the Chinese emperor, knew that opium was illegal over in Britain, and he was, trying to say, why are you...
Exactly, and there's a female empress at this time, too. She was pretty corrupt as well. She was trying to get some stuff out of this, too. But the other members of the dynasty were saying, well, hey, we need to combat this. We've got to stop this from happening. And so finally, she said, all right, let's try and fight them, and it didn't work out so well. Yes?
I actually just yesterday watched a documentary on opiates, and I guess like a third of China was addicted.
I believe it. I mean,
so many people.
Yeah, imagine the billions that were there. I mean, how many are there now? What, like 2 or 3 billion people in China? Okay, and so at this time there had to have been close to 1 billion or so. So that's a lot of people that are hooked on weed. I mean, if you look at the pictures, they've got these huge smokehouses where people are just laying around with cats just laying on their chests as they've got this massive bong sitting there, just, and then they're just passing out. It's just disgusting, absolutely disgusting. And yet, that's what European culture does to the Chinese. Hey, if we can't do it, we're going to make you do it so we can make money. Capitalism! All right, so then we have the importance of spheres of influence after that point, because once the Brits start doing it, what's everybody else want to do?
Open door policy.
Open door policy! Who invented it? Anyone?
We did.
Yeah, we did. All right, so a Republican in Congress who was a part of I think he was a part of either a Foreign Relations Committee or he was a part of the President's cabinet at the time. He said, well, hey, you know what? Everybody else is competing here. It might bring about a war, so what we should do is we should all have our own little sphere of influence. And what is a sphere of influence?
You have one control of the market where no one else does.
There you go. You've got control of that market. How do you stimulate a desire for your products if they don't want it?
Fight a war over it.
Right?
Yeah.
You make them want it, right? You find ways to make them want that product. And so that open door policy is you allow us in here to start to exploit these open markets, and we're going to make it happen. Now the Boxers didn't like it. You guys remember what the Boxers were actually called?
the
Black cat, right?
No.
something.
Righteous
or other.
Fist.
Alright, the Fists of Righteous Harmony. Alright, so the Fists of Righteous Harmony, they were called that because what they practice?
Boxing.
Alright, so Kung Fu, they practice some martial arts in order to, as part of their culture, but also as a method of resisting white encroachment into their country. And so they are going to have themselves a lovely little rebellion. They're going to capture several embassies that you had European missionaries in. They're going to burn missionaries to the ground. They're going to kill and pillage like crazy in these missionaries, in these embassies, and take many of these people hostage. So, what will governments around the world do?
Who sent in their own?
Yes, they will send in their own ninjas in the form of Marines, right? So they will send in almost like a UN peacekeeping force where the Dutch, the Russians, the Germans, the French, the Americans, the Japanese, they all sent in an army together and then went in and owned the Boxers. And so the results for China, is it looking good for them?
No.
Any ideas as to why Mao Zedong is going to be so pissed off 50 years later? Huh? You seeing it? Okay. I would be angry too. Okay. So, not going to look good for them. Meanwhile, we have Japan. So tell me about Japan before 1853 and 54.
The samurai.
The samurai. Samurai culture. Medieval culture, right? Okay, so Tom Cruise hasn't showed up yet. Yes, so they're not modernized yet. What else? Anyone? They're a very closed society, similar to China. Tell me, how is Japan different from China?
They believed all their ground was sacred.
Okay, and that's going to happen more after the Meiji Restoration, right? That's going to be coming. So that had always been around as an idea, but it will be overly emphasized after the imperialists come in and knock on their door. All right. So why did America show up and knock on their door? Okay. So sphere of influence. So they wanted to trade, right? Started to exploit that market. Who did it? Matthew Perry. Very good. Okay. Why else would the United States want a port? An open port way across the Pacific. Yeah, all right. Do we have Hawaii yet? That's a really long way away, too. No. All right, so do we need places to stop our ships on the big Pacific? Absolutely. Okay, and so,
Did we,
Japan...
have to, take Hawaii for someone?
Did we what?
Do we have to, take Hawaii for someone?
Yes, we took it from the native Hawaiians and Queen Liliuokalani. And so Queen Liliuokalani tried to resist. But what we did is we went in and first there were a bunch of white boys that came in and got everybody sick. And took away their lands and sort of enslaved their people to grow sugarcane. And so when Queen Liliuokalani tried to protest, the American government under William McKinley sent in our government and sent in our troops too, and just took over. Basically, they staged a coup d'etat in which the white guys overthrew Queen Liliuokalani and then took over the government without having any legitimacy to do so. Right? Yay, imperialism! Okay, so, feudal Japan, we had this idea where we had the emperor, certainly, as he was a significant figurehead, godlike in many ways, but that's going to come with that emphasis here in a minute. And then we had the shogun, and who was the shogun supposed to, what was the shogun's job?
War.
He's like the war minister. His name, or his title, means barbarian expeller, right? So he is the barbarian expeller. And so his whole job is to keep out barbarian influences or other outsider influences. Because remember, how did they view outsider? As inferior. All right, so non-human people. They viewed them as devils. They viewed them as gaijin. So they hate everybody who's not Japanese. And then we have the samurai. Who are the samurai?
They were
Awesome ninjas, right? They got the super. Yes, okay, so we got the Yomoto Damaji coming from these guys, right? So they are the spirit warriors. They're meant to protect this culture as well. Now, Matthew Perry shows up and uses a little gunboat diplomacy. What's it mean?
He puts bigger guns in them, and they have to do what he says.
Yeah, watch out, right? Okay, watch out for Dino's guns. Okay, so essentially you might remember the story from last year. He showed up. The Shogun was like, whoa, buddy, nice try. You're a barbarian, gaijin. Get the heck out of here, right? And he was threatening Matthew Perry and threatening his fleet. But then Matthew Perry said, oh, okay, well, hold on a second. Look at those boats right there. Sent a little signal, and there go all the explosions off the boat. And they go, oh my, yes, that is way cooler than anything we have. We have fireworks, that's pretty cool. But nothing compared to those cannons and that beautiful fleet. Now, what kind of fleet was it initially? Was it steel or wood? It was wood still. So it was a primarily wood fleet. And even that was incredibly impressive. But then when Matthew Perry shows up later the next year, what did he bring with him? Steel boats with steam power. He really wanted to impress him at that point. And so, once they showed up the second time saying, hey, it's time for westernization, time for you to open your doors to us, Japan was sent into disarray, as you can imagine. Their entire culture ripped out from under them because some white folks showed up and showed them that they were, not as good as them. And so, as a result, what are they going to have to do to fix their culture and not become another China, which will be raped by European and Western powers? Modernized. And what's that time period called? The Meiji Restoration. All right. So goals. Sorry, I forgot about this one. Yeah. All right. So the response to Matthew Perry's showing up and bringing in Westernization is going to be that the samurai are basically going to go crazy. And working for the Shogun, they're going to try and find a way to get rid of people that were trying to liberalize and become more like the West and open their doors to the West. So they're going to go running around trying to assassinate people like crazy. There's going to be all kinds of terrorism happening as well. Finally, the liberals will overtake them and bring in a new time period known as the Meiji Restoration. All right, Tino, what do you got?
Why did the Japanese, like when we came to North America, all the natives colonies, white men, flying over East Asia, did that not happen?
That's a good question.
I'm thinking they're pretty much isolated by thousands of dollars of mountain range. They really didn't have any contact with Europe.
They had some contact because going all the way back to, I can't remember which explorer it was, but there were explorers that had shown up in Japan before. They just hadn't shown up with gunboats, right? They just shown up on missionary types of things. Typically they were kicked out.
Even in China, there wasn't you read about North America, and they're just disease wipes out villages.
Well, if you remember back to the Black Death went from Europe. Well, started in Russia and that whole area along the Black Sea, and then it spread over to Europe, and then it spread over to China and India in the other direction. So China, India, Japan, they all suffered the fates of the Black Death as well, just not quite to the same degree that Europe did. But worldwide, the Black Death killed, something like 7 million people. It was crazy. Yeah, it's killed a total of about a third of the entire world population. But North America was excluded because they had those oceans. Does that make sense? All right, so the Meiji Restoration, this is going to become a big turning point for Japan because now that they've overcome some of those more conservative elements, their goal is to modernize, westernize like crazy. What kind of economy do we want to bring in if we want to be a modernized, westernized type of nation? Capitalism! Yeah, all right, so they're going to go capitalist. But wait a second, Japan doesn't have many resources, so what are we going to do, Japan? Go take them. Yes, we're going to go take them from lesser peoples next to us. All right, weaker cultures next to us. Politically, they're going to need to jazz things up a little bit. Now, they're not going to do like a republic or anything like that. That's way too liberal for them. Instead, what are they going to do militarily and politically to emphasize their nationalistic drive, their nationalistic culture? What are they going to do? What are we going to do with the emperor at that point? Make him God. Exactly. All right, so before that time, he was more of a figurehead. Now he is fully edified throughout every aspect of their culture and their military and their society to have this godlike status. So because Americans came in with this idea of manifest destiny, and because other powers came in with this idea of social Darwinism in the 19th century, now Japan is going to borrow from them and say, well, we're doing the same thing. Our emperor is God. Our land is heaven on earth. We have a mission as well to spread across the globe. Anyone remember what their manifest destiny was called? It was called Hakuuchiu. Bless me. All right, so Hakuuchiu is the name of their manifest destiny. All right, so now what they're going to do is go on a mission just like the dirty capitalists from other countries have done in terms of imperialism. So, imperialism, what are they going to do first? Where are they going to attack first? Philippines. Not yet. Not yet. Korea. All right, so we're going to do Korea and China. So, Korea is the first because they were fighting with China. Sorry, my arrow should be up there. I don't know why it's not. So they call it the Sino-Japanese War because the Sino is meant to represent whom? Which culture? China. Because who are they fighting? China. And they're fighting over which territory? Korea. Okay. All right. So Sino means what? China. Because they're fighting whom? China. And they're fighting over? Korea. Exactly. They will go in there and burn, rape and pillage and enslave all kinds of peoples as well. They're later going to get pushed out a little bit, and they're going to re-enter Korea in the 1930s, and then it's going to be even worse. We'll get to that later. Next thing they're going to do is fight the Russians in the Russo-Japanese War. Remember we talked about this last week a bit, about how the Russians didn't really see it coming, and boy were they surprised. Boy was the whole world surprised. Because when the Japanese went to war against Russia and almost won, they're looking pretty awesome at this point, aren't they? So, they get parts of Manchuria, they assert some of their dominance militarily over the Russians. What's the effect? What is the lesson we can learn from Japan here?
They are the ones watching.
They are legit, exactly. Everyone's watching them because they're the first non-Western power to begin to challenge Western expansionism. True or false? They are just like Africa. False, all right, because Africa is going to get raped by Europeans at this time. True or false? They are just like the Philippines, who fought for their independence from a foreign empire and then won their independence. False, because are they really going to win their independence? We'll have 9 months of a free Filipino republic before who comes in and takes them over? We did. Okay, all right, under the idea that, we paid $20 million for it. Whatever. All right, so Japan is going to be far different from any of the other powers that will be imperialized at this time, including Africa. Remember, there was a scramble for Africa. You can see that by looking at the maps. Here's Africa in 1878. What are the colors representing on the map? Different European countries that have gone in here and set up shop. Yes?
This is kind of like going back, but
okay.
When did South Korea and North Korea, when did they split? Was it during the
During the Korean War. So, excuse me, right before the Korean War, because after World War II, we divided our influence between the United States and the Soviet Union. Because Stalin was like, yo, I get all of Korea. It's like this thumb that's really important for some strange reason, hanging off the end of Asia, right? And so Stalin wanted it, and we were like, no, sorry, we fought pretty hard too, so we're going to get half of it, and you can have half of it. All right, and so we were thinking, we're not actually going to take Korea, we're going to give it to the South Koreans, under the idea that Stalin would do the same, as long as Stalin does the same, right? But then, and so Stalin was like, yeah, totally, I'll do that. And then he nefariously curled his mustache and found ways to inspire the North Koreans to go commie, and gave them some guns and ammo to go and attack South Korea, and they were real enthusiastic about it, and then Mao Zedong was like, hey, I'll totally hook you up too. And then, after that happened, our army got owned, and so we had to send in a whole bunch of people to stop that from happening with the UN support. Yeah, but we're getting to that later. It's fun times. Oh, can't wait for the Cold War. All right, so Africa, you can see along the coast they're colonizing because they're setting up what kind of areas? Full colonization?
No.
What are they setting up? Trading posts. There you go. How's that different here? Huh? Yeah, a little bit of full colonization. Okay, so here we have less than 10% colonized by 1878. By 1890 until 1914, we had over 90% colonized. All the different colors representing the various European powers. The yellow, who is this? Trying to go from Cape Town to Cairo. Huh? Cape Town to Cairo? The English! All right, so the Dirty Brits are trying to go from Cape Town to Cairo. They started here, started spreading their army down, fighting in the Sudan and in Egypt. And then you had a guy named Cecil Rhodes taking a bunch of diamond mines in the south, in South Africa, and then starting to move his way north and establishing colonies like Rhodesia after himself as he's spreading up there. And who got in their way just at the last minute? Germany! Oh, man, that ticked off the Brits. All right, and then other areas, you can see Germany. You've got the Belgians. They're going to significantly rape the Congo there. And then the French. They're taking this whole chunk of land. They're taking French West Sahara. Why? Okay, concurred. Why? Take all of that desert wasteland. It looks cool on the map. No one needs to know that that is a dank pit of despair that you don't want to be without any water. No one needs to know that. It just looks cool on the map, doesn't it? Yeah.
So I thought that Dutch had influence in South Africa.
They did. They were called the Dutch Afrikaners. And so they were not an established colony. They were Dutch farmers that went down there and established a bunch of farms. And then when the Brits took it over, the Dutch were pissed and fought a guerrilla war against the Brits, and that turned into their own little version of Iraq, essentially. It was really bad. Really bad for the Brits. They lost a lot of people. You know who was fighting there gloriously? Winston Churchill. You know who was captured in battle gloriously? Winston Churchill. That's right. You know who was helping out with the Gatling guns on the mountains of Spion Kop? in the Boer War? Winnie, that's right. And then he was sent into a jail, and you know who escaped from that prison? Winnie, that's right. And then he ran all the way back to his encampment, and then he wrote a bunch of articles about it, and everyone was like, oh, look at this 20-year-old Winston Churchill. How cool is he? And then he decided to keep fighting all the way until the liberation of Ladysmith, at which point they won the war. And then Winnie, looking pretty awesome at that point. Young man. You know where else he had fought? Afghanistan. And whilst fighting in Afghanistan, you know what term he came up with for us in order to give us a cool new term for military history? Sniper. All right, so sniping is a term that Winston Churchill came up with because he was fighting alongside his other redcoats and the Afghanis hiding in the mountain passes using rifles. How were they resisting? Snipering. Sound familiar? Hasn't changed much, has it? Okay. And so Winston, the guy that came up with that. Oh. And then you know where else he's going to fight? He's going to fight in the Sudan against the Khalifa right over here at the Battle of Omdurman. All right, we're going to hear more about that in a minute. Yes? The second map, this is 1890. So you notice, just over the course of a little bit of time here, what is it, 12 years? Something like that. Yeah. 1878 to 1890. Whoa. Yeah. So, big changes, right? So, by 1890, this is how it looks. It's going to last until 1914. All right, so let's take a look at the map here. So, Cecil Rhodes, tell me, what did he do? He was an entrepreneur and a capitalist, and what did he do? Went from Cape Town to Cairo. Exactly. All right, so Cape Town, down here in South Africa, he's trying to build a what to connect these two areas? A railroad. So he's building a railroad north. Meanwhile, the army is building a railroad south under Lord Kitchener for the British. And fighting alongside him was Winston Churchill, even though Lord Kitchener really didn't like Winston Churchill at all for some strange reason. I love the guy. How could you not like Winston Churchill? It's funny. Okay, so Leopold II, he is going to go into Belgium, and he is going to do what to the Belgians? All right, own them. Yes, so his people are going to commit all kinds of terrible atrocities in the Congo, and we're going to get some stories about it afterward. After the Congo is dominated and its people suppressed and oppressed, we're going to get a book about this whole area. And what's that one going to be called? By Joseph Conrad. Heart of Darkness. Anyone? Did you guys read that in English? Going to. All right, all right. Joseph Conrad. It's about imperialism. It's about a guy who goes into the Congo as a civilized human being, and he exits. How do you think? As a savage. All right. So is it a pro-imperialism or con-imperialism? Con. All right. If that's not enough to write your AP English essay, I don't know what it is. Right? There you go. I just summarized it. You don't even need to read it now, right? Kidding. Read it. It's good for the AP Euro exam too. That's one of those ones that you have to read. You know the other ones? What's that big one? Big Rock Canyon Mountain? Whatever. But when it comes to Joseph Conrad, you read it! All right, there you go. So African fever is what's going to be stimulated by Cecil Rhodes and Leopold, because all of a sudden, by the 1880s and 90s, everybody wants in on Africa. Do they have a lot of stuff in Africa?
Yeah.
Yeah, potentially. Is it going to cost you a lot of money and a lot of lives to get it, though?
Yeah.
Yeah, but is it totally worth it because you look awesome on the map and you can get resources and you can exploit people and put your boot on their neck? Yeah, all right, so the British are going to occupy Egypt. Then they're going to spread south. Now the French, they're going to conquest the Sahara and start to spread east and west. Then the Dutch Afrikaners, remember they were a bunch of farmers? Where? Where? South Africa. All right, the problem for them, they had their old Cape Town colony, this small colony in South Africa, but the problem for them is right beneath their feet as they are farming is more than just perfect soil for growing stuff. What else are they going to find? Gold, and especially diamonds. That's right. You heard of the Dutch family, De Beers? Anyone? They own, well, all right, ladies, I'm sure when you start getting married, you're going to hear about De Beers, right? They own about 90% of the world's diamonds, and they just slowly release these tiny little diamonds in order to increase demand and increase the price that way. Right? Okay, so, gentlemen, watch out for De Beers. Okay, so, Dutch Afrikaners, they are going to be hanging out, and then they realize, oh, there's diamonds under us, and so everybody's going to want in there. The Brits will be the first. Massive vault. Yeah, those guys. All right, and a lot of them are blood diamonds, too. All right, so. Yes. You know, they were Dutch, and now a lot of the diamonds go to Belgium. Belgium is like the diamond capital of the world. When I was in Brussels, I actually did take a little tour of one of these diamond factories. They I mean, you can't like reach in there. Didn't work. Yeah, didn't work.
Do you
All
remember
right.
that diamond heist that took like 13 seconds?
Yeah, heard about it. Crazy, isn't it?
What happened?
That's entrepreneurial spirit. Moving on! Alright, so the Conference of Berlin. Tell me, we have all of these different countries competing to conquer all of Africa, right? All of these different European countries trying to do it. How are we going to avoid a war? Say, for instance, you've got the Brits going south, fighting the Khalifa. You've got the French going to the east and west. What's bound to happen at some point? They collide, exactly. The Italians, meanwhile, are fighting over in Ethiopia, trying to take that country unsuccessfully, because what are other European powers going to give to the natives in order to stop the Italians? Guns and ammo, you name it. So, as the result, you've got competition big time. Could this erupt in war not only in Africa, but elsewhere?
Yeah.
Like a world war, potentially? Indeed, it could, couldn't it? And so, if you are Otto von Bismarck, curling your waxen mustache, what would you do? What would you do? You are Otto von Bismarck, curling your waxen mustache. All right, that's the next question. True or false? Otto von Bismarck was a big fan of imperializing. False. False! Yes, indeed. He was not a big fan of it. He wanted to stay in Europe and maintain the peace, right? What a good guy. Smart guy, too. Because he did not want to be involved. And so, in the Conference of Berlin, he's going to get together with the French Prime Minister, a guy named Jules Ferry, and they're going to discuss the new method of colonization in Africa. No longer can you just go in there and say, yeah, we own this, you know, and then move on and hope that no one takes it, right? Instead, what do you have to do if you want that territory? Can I just pass through and say, that's ours, see ya, and then run away? Can I do that? No, they were doing that for a while, and, you know, just sending some capitalists in there to exploit the markets. Now they're saying, you have to set up shop. No more of this sphere of influence idea that we see happening at the same time in China. Instead, you have to have effective occupation. You come in with your army, you put down your flag, you suppress the people, and then you set up your government. And if nobody likes it, then you kill them. All right, so, but hopefully in terms of what they're talking about, that won't mean that you're killing other Europeans. So the sad thing is, it's going to establish this long history of Europeans going in and dominating territories for their own benefit, okay? And so after 1890, though, anyone remember what's going to happen to Bismarck in 1890? He gets fired. By which man? Yippee! Exactly. Kaiser Wilhelm II. And so Kaiser Wilhelm II, true or false, loved imperialism. True. What did he want? Place in the sun, exactly. He wanted to spread around the globe. So he is going to start getting those light green territories on the map, forcing Germany into those areas. And will he do it nicely, politely? Be like, oh, hi, friends. We're just going to borrow this for a little while. Look at that. Huh? No, he's going to say, what, you want that? Tough cookies. Hey, you know what? We want that right there. Yeah, that's right. And then do a little muscle flexing. You know, start terrifying the little people all around them. And so that brings us to a video. This is, I think, just a perfect amount of time before the class ends, if my clock is correct here. So this video is about some of the situations happening in Uganda. It also gives us some issues around the area dealing with British imperialism. Pay attention. This will be good for the debate tomorrow.
The conflict officially began in 1986, when the first northern rebel movement took up arms against the southern-based Museveni. But the deeper roots of this north-south divide can be traced back to the late 1800s, during what was called by the imperial European powers the scramble for Africa. Colonization was motivated by the European hunger for African resources. The subsequent exploitation of the African people and the uprooting of their spiritual values by Christian missionaries would leave a permanent European stamp on the continent.
The mindset is the barbarians are backward and inferior, and for their own benefit we have to uplift them and civilize them and educate them and so on. The psychology behind it is kind of transparent. I mean, when you've got your boot on someone's neck and you're crushing them, you can't say to yourself, I'm a son of a bitch, and I'm doing it for my own benefit. So what you have to do is figure out some way of saying, I'm doing it for their benefit. And that's a very natural position to take when you're beating somebody with a club.
Britain cut the largest piece of African cake from Cairo to Cape Town, in addition to Nigeria and a few West African regions. It was also the British Empire that in 1894 imposed an arbitrary boundary around the many diverse ethnic groups and kingdoms that would make up Uganda. The southern Bantu-speaking people were given economic, political, and educational advantage. The northern ethnic groups, two in particular, the Acholi and the Langi, were the main recruits for military and police positions. By exploiting linguistic, ethnic, and cultural differences between the peoples of the North and South, Britain's divide and rule policies created a tension between them that helped to maintain British rule. The French took an east-west slice of the continent as well as Madagascar. The Belgians took Rwanda, Burundi, and the Congo in what Joseph Conrad called the vilest scramble for loot that ever disfigured the history of human conscience. Slave labor took over 5 million lives. In Rwanda, Belgium entrenched the idea of the Hutu as a workforce and the Tutsi as extenders of Belgian rule. The politicization of these two cultures would profoundly contribute to the genocide of 1994. In Sudan, the British ruled the Arabs in the north and the blacks in the south as separate colonies, only to combine the areas before independence in 1956. The result has been relentless civil war, the Darfur massacres being the latest tragedy. The Portuguese decimated Angola, Mozambique, and Guinea-Bissau well into the 1970s. The Italians took Libya, Eritrea, and Somalia. The Germans added Cameroon and Tanzania and committed the first genocide of the 20th century against the Herero people.
No colonial power is going to succeed unless it's going to play on existing divisions and sharpen them, increase them, exacerbate them. So one of the first questions after the end of colonialism is who belongs and who isn't? Who was part of the colonial struggle and who betrayed? And this is time to settle scores.
At least with one colony, especially Uganda there, that we're getting into, of how a European country can come into Africa and establish their rule and keep their rule effective. So effective does not need to mean nice or polite or in any way beneficial to anyone but themselves. So how did they do it? How did these countries do it when they were going into Africa? All right, so separated the tribes and exploited their differences, didn't they? So they would give to like one tribe this benefit of maybe education or money, and then the next tribe they'd give them politics or military. And so what's the result going to be when Europeans leave and withdraw their influence? And kill each other. All right. So debate tomorrow. Don't forget we have 2 more slides to finish, and then we will debate.